Okay, you're live.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Mayor Jason Larry, City Virtual Meeting Agenda for November 9th, 2020, 7 o'clock p.m. Ms. Isom, if you do us the honor, please.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Jimmy Clanton.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Turner.
Here.
Councilmember Jasmine Cabo.
Here.
Councilmember George Turner.
Here.
Councilmember Tammy Grimes.
Here.
Mayor Jason Larry.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Rob Turner, if you do us the pleasure, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let us pray. Precious Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love, grace, and mercy to allow us to meet and work together for the betterment of the city. We can do nothing without you as mayor, council, and staff, and so we ask that you will speak to us and through us as we represent not only the city of Stonecrest, but the kingdom of God, and that we walk in the reflection of your love, your mercy, your forgiveness, your patience, wisdom, compassion, and all that is right in your sight. Be glorified in all that we do, and that at the end of this meeting, we desire for you to say, well done, good and faithful servant. And Father, we pray that you will touch our mayor's body and destroy what's trying to destroy him, the cancer, and give him total healing and total restoration. In the mighty name that is above every name, the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of
the United States of
America and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
and liberty and justice for all. Council, before we go on to the approval of the minutes, Madam Clerk, Ms. Isom, I'm going to remove appointments. There will be no appointments for acting city manager this evening.
Okay.
After our minutes, I'm going to move straight into a vote for the mayor's leave. So that will be that'll be right after approval of the minutes.
Okay.
So first set of minutes, approval of October 23rd, 2020, fiscal year 21 budget hearing for public hearing minutes. Council, is there any additions or changes?
Mr. Mayor, I don't believe that was attached to the package. Ms. Isom, can you confirm that?
No, it should have been in the email per Megan. She was going to move that to the next meeting.
The 23rd, October 23rd?
A copy of the latest minutes, yes.
Okay. Then I'll go to B, approval of the October 26, 2020.
Mr. Mayor, I can just cut to the chase here. I only see one attached, and that is E.
Okay.
Unless I'm missing something. Somebody please help me.
No, that is correct.
That was my fault.
That's correct. Per Megan, we will have those minutes at the next meeting.
All right. Sorry about that, Council. We'll go straight to E then. Thank you, Councilman Turner. You saved us some time. Approval of the November 2nd, 2020 fiscal 121 budget approval minutes. All right. Seeing no changes.
I'm sorry. It took me long to get off mute. I do have a question. So it's written that the motion failed, but I don't know that maybe that's the best way to describe that. Maybe we can have a discussion about that. Maybe just word that differently. I'm trying to think of a recommendation, but I mean, even if you count the yays and the noes, that's not even a quorum to have had voted on a motion. So I don't think it's technically failed. But then, you know, and I don't want us to get into, or my point of bringing this up is not to get into a debate about parliamentary procedure, but if there's a better choice of adjective to describe what that is, or what that was, rather.
Well, I'll have to defer to Mr. Denmark when if you have 6 people total, 2 vote yes, 1 votes no, and 3 does not vote or abstain. Mr. Denmark, what do you call that?
You could probably characterize it as the motion failing. You could say the motion did not pass. I mean, the distinction is purely a semantic distinction. It doesn't fundamentally matter. There may be the preference on the part of the mayor and city council to use different words. But under the charter, every member is obligated to vote. And you can only abstain if you state those reasons in writing in advance of the meeting. So I wasn't present. I don't understand why people did not vote. There may have been good reasons. There may not have been good reasons for not voting. But at the end of the day, the motion was made and properly seconded, and that motion did not pass. I don't know if that's a more palatable phrasing than fail. I don't know.
Well, so the reason I asked that is not to debate different adjectives, but the call for the vote did not have the proper approval. So we were not ready to vote because the call for the question did not have the affirmative votes. So at least let's just say that is not captured here. So the picture that I think that the minutes present is maybe one that's not exactly accurate to what took place. But the reason why the votes weren't cast is because the call for the question did not achieve the affirmative votes to move on with actually casting a vote.
So the call for the question would have been illegal because there's only one thing that you could do in a special call meeting, which was to approve the budget for the F-121 or not. You had no leeway either way, up or down. That's the only thing that you could do with regards to the action that was called for during that meeting.
Right. And so because the opportunity, well, I don't know that has anything to do with the call for the question, though. So maybe we can have a longer discussion than I anticipated, because there was a motion put on the floor, and we're not required to, I guess, vote on that singular motion alone. Right. I think there's an opportunity to either add, submit a substitute motion. But that's kind of, I don't know if that's what I'm talking about. I'm more specifically referring to this motion was put on the floor and that motion was seconded. And then the call for the vote came through discussion, but the call for the vote needed to have the affirmative votes to, I guess, supersede the discussion and jump right into voting. Right. So the reason why we didn't vote, which is why it says not ready, is because the call for the question did not receive its affirmative votes. So,
Councilwoman, I can appreciate all this. I don't have it in me tonight for this. What do y'all want to do? Or what do you want to call it? Just say what it is.
okay. I understand that you're frustrated. I'm just trying to have a civil conversation about maybe a better choice of explaining what happened through the minutes, because the minutes are important.
May I?
Yes, Councilman Turner.
Move to not approve the minutes from November 2nd and have them reworked.
Properly moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Right. District 1.
Aye.
District 2.
Aye.
District 3.
Aye.
District 4.
Aye.
District 5.
Aye.
Mayor, nay. Folks, this is where we are today. In our charter, section 2.03, there is a provision that if a member of council, and mayor is a member of council, is going to miss meetings, then it has particularly the regular meetings of the council, needs to be excused by council. So for the general public, one thing that I don't like about this job is sharing your personal business to the world, because my wife and I and family are by nature private people. But when you're in public office, this comes with it. So with that, my cancer has returned, and I'm not going to go through what I did a year or so ago. I'm gonna follow, what our charter says, and for lack of a better term, it's aggressive and it's moved around, and per my wife's instructions, who I listen to the most, this time I take care of me. So with that, our charter says, failing to attend 1/3 of the regular meetings of the council in a 3-month period without being excused by council, I would forfeit my seat, or any of us would do the same. So following the charter, I am publicly asking for a motion to be excused by council to take treatment for now through March. So since I am the afflicted person, I can't make the motion or the vote, or I can share the motion, but I'm going to leave that to council, and then Mayor Pro Tem, you can handle the vote from there.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that you have leave for health reasons and health purposes for restoration of your body and healing until March 2021. Is that what you requested?
Yes, sir.
I make that motion.
Mr. Turner, Councilman Rob Turner, we hear your motion. Is that a second?
Second.
Been properly moved and second to excuse council member and Mayor Jason Larry from attending council meetings from now until March. We'll just leave it at March,
Thank you.
and we'll be more specific later on. Are you ready for the question?
Question?
Yes.
Yes.
Call for the question.
Yes,
All
we're
in-
ready.
Yes.
All in favor, say aye. Starting with District 1,
Aye.
District 2,
Aye.
District 3,
Aye.
District 4 is aye, District 5,
Aye.
and I think in this case, the mayor will recuse himself from voting,
Correct.
has recused himself from voting. So the motion passes 5 to 1 abstain.
Thank you, council. Pledge will continue to be in charge as he has been the whole time. And I will continue my duties at City Hall, but the meetings belong to you all. And I wanted to apologize to some vendors and other people that really wanted to meet and have meetings. I just don't have it in me, guys, so you all take care.
You can just pause a moment and we're going to pray for the mayor. Councilman Turner, will you?
I will. Thank you. Father, we know that you are healed by the blood that you shed on Calvary's cross. So now, Lord, we thank you now for our mayor, the man that you've called to cover this city. Father, we know that he's going through a physical battle. Lord, we ask right now for your divine intervention, your divine healing, and for your touch, that that thing that's in his body that's trying to destroy him, you will destroy it, and that he will have long life and healthy life and quality of life. So now we pray and come together in agreement and in unity that he's walking in health, he's walking in divine health and unity and strength in his body, that he will recover and be restored, and that he will come back and move forth and fulfill the calling that you placed in his life. Bless his family to be a strength and a comfort to them, and let him walk through this thing knowing that you are with him to comfort him and strengthen him every way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Then in that spirit, we will continue with the meeting. The next item on the agenda is presentations. The first presentation is Stonecrest Public Safety Feasibility Study. Who is leading that?
Be Dr. Malik Watkins, who is on the call. He is the person that represents the Carl Vinson Institute. with the University of Georgia. The committee chose UGA's Carl Vinson Institute to conduct a feasibility study. And so he'll be giving you a overview of that study. I think the study is included in your packet. And Dr. Watkins, if you need to share a screen, I have made that button available for you. It's a little green button in the bottom portion of your screen.
Great. Let's see here. Coming up now. All right. Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. My name is Malik Watkins with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, specifically the Strategic Operations Planning Assistance Group. Although the circumstances are dire, and also in terms of the pandemic, but then also the news from what I've heard with your meeting thus far. Certainly, although it is good to meet you all virtually. I'm with the Carl Vinson Institute, and we've certainly enjoyed the opportunity to work with you all in regards to putting together your feasibility study. Just to give you a little bit about me, my PhD is in city and regional planning, and I essentially travel around and provide management, consulting, and technical assistance or applied research services to local governments, primarily in Georgia, but I've also worked internationally, overseas in West Africa, also in Central America. I've also done a lot of these types of studies around the country. I'm certified in all the Lean Six Sigma dynamics. And so I've done a lot of this with the private sector, but then also in the public sector. And actually I live in Savannah. So I only go to Athens maybe once or twice a year. Primarily I spend all my time out in the field doing these types of studies to help support the goals and strategic priorities of local governments around the state. So just to get started, one of the things I want to do is I don't want to kind of go through all the different numbers in the report unless you have specific questions about them. I spent several years teaching statistics, and I do realize that it's the evening and you all have a lot going on. And one thing I have realized over the years is talking a lot about statistics and numbers without getting to the point tends to put everybody asleep. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of get to the specific executive summary component. And if there are some specific questions associated with more detail, then certainly I'm here to answer those, or we can also continue the conversation in that regard. So just the background of what we're doing, or what we have been doing, is analyzing the nature of the service arrangements that you all have with DeKalb County in terms of law enforcement, public safety services. We looked at the numbers in terms of identifying an appropriate size for your city in terms of a police department based upon approximated levels of service and the current provision by DeKalb County Police Department. And also we looked at calculating the costs associated with providing a police force of the size estimated. So our methodologies, we did stakeholder interviews with your personnel. We also talked with the DeKalb County folks, E911 personnel, additional subject matter experts. We've been providing these types of studies for quite a long time. We also provide the promotional testing for police departments and sheriff's offices around the state. So we do have a lot of subject matter experts on hand that deal with these. And I specifically have been involved with a lot of these. Identification of the characteristics of comparable units of government. At the same time, we deal with some of the generalities and benchmarking. But also we're open to discussing with you some of the actual specificities that you all may decide that you want to have, because obviously if you're looking at setting up a public safety situation, then they should be shaped and customized around your specific needs. We've done a lot of work with the International City County Management Association, ICMA. Then also we pull in some of the methodologies from IACP, and also looking at some of the professional and academic literature, of which we also make a significant contribution to that in regards to local government policing. And so right off the bat, preliminary considerations, what we looked at was level of service. whether you're looking at basic service or some of the specialized units. We looked at capital and operational expenditures, what would be the cost in terms of startup, in terms of capital, but then also some of those ancillary services that are necessary to maintain effective operations, whether it be human resources or fleet management, things of that nature. E911 operations, how that would continue and what will be required in order to set that up and maintain that continuity. But then also the additional risk management associated with having individuals that, basically are responsible for law enforcement and some of the risk associated with that, whether it be interacting with the public, whether it be accidents, whether it be some of the responsibility that you would take on in regards to what may happen in regards to some of your equipment decisions, things of that nature. So right off the bat, what we look at is staffing levels. Obviously, when we start talking about policing, as opposed to some of the other services that local governments provide, specifically, we're talking about costs that are driven by staff, number of officers, the level of service, the types of services provided, whether specialized, basic, traffic-based, investigative. Either way, it's always highly labor intensive when we deal with policing and feasibility studies. And so a lot of this is centered upon identifying the number of staff that would be needed. And we'll go more into that here momentarily. Looked at traditional methods would be the standard patrol units. We pull 911 data for your specific area to then look at numbers of calls, types of calls, things of that nature, but then also looking at some of the generally accepted measurements of performance, because we do a lot with performance management, benchmarking, utilizing metrics to assess what is taking place versus just kind of the politics or the narratives that develop when we're assessing services of this nature. Sorry about that. One of the things I really want to draw your attention to, though, that I'm sure is not something that you all have missed, would be the issue of problem-oriented or community-oriented policing. Obviously, policing overall is a hot button issue around the country. I've worked on multiple studies where we looked at setting up police departments, merging police departments, all the different types of arrangements that could be set up. And a lot of this comes down to you customizing it towards what your specific needs are. And so when we get into non-traditional methods, as opposed to just dealing with traffic, as opposed to just dealing with investigations, but we're talking about an orientation of a police department, whereas officers just aren't in their cars, just aren't in their vans, just aren't on their horses, but they're actually out engaging people. And so obviously, if you took that as a primary strategic priority of your local government, then the cost would shift based upon how you would determine that to take place. And so a lot of the traditional methods just deal with officers, capital, and cars, when what we're talking about here is how you would shape your policing orientation to match the specific needs of your community, which obviously, as we mentioned before, is a hot button issue around the country.
Excuse me, can I ask you a question? Is it all right?
Please do.
Now, if you can go back to that, stay on that slide for a minute. Do you look at patterns and certain days on how certain, activities are increasing or decreasing, valleys and peaks in reference to those type of things?
Yes, what we tend to use is averaging. And so we look at averaging in order to get some general costs. And so that would include, some of these peaks, some of these valleys. Obviously, though, as you mentioned, that would be a significant issue that would need to be considered in a final decision in terms of having the number of officers necessary for when they had a peak, but then also having those reserves that you could pull in, or what we talk about some of the agreements with the adjacent jurisdictions in case you wanted to have a lower day-to-day level in terms of numbers and resources. And so that's one of the things that we would work with you on is in terms of what your priorities are. What would be the optimal number of officers, which you would have to decide in terms of those lower levels, whether you wanted to focus on traffic, One of the things we'll talk about, do you really want those specialized units like SWAT and K9 units and gang investigative units and detectives and so forth? Or would you want some type of agreement with an adjacent jurisdiction to provide those services while you went to the basics? But yeah, the averaging would include all of that. However, it would take a higher level of specificity to actually get into those times when you'd have a higher degree of crime that you'd want addressed, or the lower. But then also kind of moving along with that, if you're dealing with community-oriented policing, then it gets away from just some of the standard traditional focuses. And if you have officers that are out there actually talking with people, obviously some of the communities I've worked in, some of the crime issues or the social unrest issues, we would say, are centered around certain neighborhoods, certain families, certain houses, and community policing officers tend to know, and you can kind of tend to function differently because there's a certain degree of trust versus just having a bunch of individuals out there. So yeah, the averaging includes that, but as you mentioned, that would also have to be a more specific conversation.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the answer.
Yes, sir. Anytime. So looking at the cost, we went basically two methods. One is we just took all the costs, in summation, without getting a lot of fancy words. Just basically took all the total expenditures by the DeKalb County folks and looked at, everything they spent, and then applied it to your specific area. We pulled in service call data, which basically we do a data request for E911 information on numbers of calls, those types of calls, and looked at what the workload would be in terms of the total call package for DCPD and applied it to Stonecrest. The second way we looked at it, and these are all comparative, and so what we're doing is that, it would be basically a misnomer or a disservice to just say, well, yeah, this is how much it would cost. Basically, nobody knows Stonecrest better than you do. I specialize in methodologies. You know way more about Stonecrest than me. And so basically what we're doing is we give you an overall framework to make a decision based upon that framework, then this would be the cost associated with it. And so with the first one, we took all the expenditures and applied it to Stonecrest share of the service calls. And the second one, we basically built the budget out by looking at what the service call data says, what are the number of officers necessary based upon best practices and standards associated with those service calls. We looked at the workload method, which would be the International Association of Chiefs of Police, to give a kind of a standard number. We looked at operational costs per officer, total department costs. We looked at what would be the startup capital in terms of cost per officer, but then also in terms of facilities per employee, what would those be? And so one deals with the share. The other one gives build a budget based upon the number of officers, but then it gives you a basic framework or a spectrum, an interval basically, on what you could expect the cost would be based upon the number of individuals that you would select to be sworn officers. So our methodology kind of centers around this. For time distribution is that when we look at some of the overall standards around the country, looking at what this variability would be in terms of the amount of time spent on each call or by a particular officer. So the standard basically is that 1/3 of an officer's time would be spent handling calls for service, 1/3 on preventive patrol, 1/3 on planning, reporting, investigation, admin, court time, and also counts for time for arresting, booking, with a greater weight on serious crimes. But I would also tell you is that while this sets the standard around the country, that because you are basically the experts on Stonecrest, there's some variability in there on how you would want to set it. Like for instance, if you want to focus in on community policing, then you might not necessarily always focus in on 1/3 of preventive control. You may increase that, so that the officers actually have a relationship with individuals in specific areas. And so a lot of this would also have to be adjusted based upon what your level of specificity is in terms of your strategic priorities for your particular area. But as it currently stands now, when we look at the time distribution per officer, the average time per DCPD call in your area is 37 minutes. The standard by the International Association of Chiefs of Police is about 45 minutes. So you all are actually beating the International Association standard, Chiefs of Police standard, by about 8 minutes. So looking at some of the officer estimates, we kind of went through the whole barrage in terms of looking at different ways to estimate the number. So we've given you a high number and we've given you a low number. And so an estimate based on reported time spent on calls in the Stonecrest area, 57.5, the number of officers we're estimating. If we look at what the initial DCPD share method is in terms of that cost allocation, time allocation, service call allocation, we're looking at about 86. But then the estimate based upon Stonecrest resource demands with the uniform division overall, full service, is about 93 officers. And so there's room in there for variability in terms of command staff, number of officers, how you would want to designate this, whether you want full patrol or the focus in on patrol, or you want community oriented policing, or you have a specific area that's problematic, so you want to use problem oriented policing in a particular area. And so a lot of this just gives you a general framework on costs, but it also shows you when we talking about number of officers, then what would some of the high and low estimates be. So we looked at these particular areas and we did the comparables. And so based upon the DCPD, but then also we adjusted it based upon some indirect allocations from the general fund. But we looked at Dunwoody and Brookhaven in terms of their startup costs and their operational costs. And as you can see, the DCPD adjusted is about 120,000 all the way up to Dunwoody's, which is about 140, just shy of $149,000 per officer. And just to give you just a kind of more of a specific idea when we start talking about numbers of officers, just kind of what that looks like overall. Now this is one of the things I really want to focus in on. I think this is actually just as important as the numbers and actually gives you a clear idea on the numbers. Is that when we start to look at number of officers, cost per officer, these are some of the variables that need to be taken into context when you start to decide on establishing the feasibility of establishing a public safety group, or to actually look at the number of officers that you want to utilize, but then also to make sure that the command staff, the strategies that they are going to talk to you about actually match what it is you're looking for. And so one of the things that we would obviously look at would be efficiency of an officer. Are they actually rolling through this, efficient? Like for instance, when we looked at the comparison of the DCPD officers in terms of times per call with what the IACP standard is, there was an 8-minute difference, but are officers functioning in an efficient, productive manner? As Mr. Turner mentioned, crime rates, are they in growth? Are they in decline? And so a number of officers may be adjusted. Are there particular geographic areas in your jurisdiction that have a higher rate of crime, also a lower rate of crime? One of the things I want you to also keep in mind also is that crime rates statistically are really kind of interesting for numbers people, because sometimes when the rate goes up, it doesn't necessarily mean things are worse. It just means that things are being reported. It could also reflect the amount of community trust that they're actually calling the police, versus some areas where we know no matter what happens, people don't call the police because sometimes they view the police as being just as challenging to get along with as the folks in the neighborhood. And so the crime rates also always have to be considered within the context of what is taking place in that particular area, because a lot of it comes down to community trust in terms of the local government and also the city. Job task, types of calls, what are the prevalent types of crimes taking place? Are we focusing on traffic? Are we dealing with violence? Are we dealing with drugs? Even in terms of if you have officers working with a local housing developer and rental or multifamily facilities, what's the difference between, or the time associated with assessing someone who has a criminal history of domestic violence versus someone who has a criminal history of smoking marijuana, and what are the implications on the community, but just even what those tasks are. The office, population ratios, mandatory minimums, collective bargaining, but a lot of these things should be considered. Command staff, yes, there's some best practices associated with that. However, the best practices sometimes need to be considered within an overall context. So I do a lot with best practices and standards, but I never allow that to overrule what someone actually in this community who knows this community is actually telling me, because sometimes the local information should supersede what someone else is doing in another area. Because I've seen best practices and standards work really well in one area and fail horribly in another, because sometimes the local context isn't taken into account. So when we looked at efficiency and productivity, also what is the uncommitted time, call volume, are there certain times of year when the volume is up? Certain times of year when the volume is down? Do you have housing developments coming? Are they single family households? Are they multifamily households? Are there demographic shifts? Are you utilizing technology? What is the capacity of the organization, ethics, things of that nature? What's the relationship with the public? And as we mentioned, some of the geographic issues and whether or not community policing will be a consistent or a pervasive characteristic of the overall strategy of your public safety department. So these are just a few of the variables that need to be considered when you go from generalizing the resources and generalizing the concept of setting up a public safety group or police department versus some of the specificity that you would want to include when you actually make a decision in that regard. And again, level of service, particularly if you want to actually get more involved with what's taking place on I-20, or you're just kind of focusing in on other areas of your community. So with that said, low and high end cost estimates. So looking at operational costs, estimated annual facility costs, annualized startup capital, total estimated cost. So on the low end, we're looking at just under 8 million. On the high end, we're looking at about 15.5 million. Now, even the low end estimate does not necessarily mean that you would be understaffed. It's essentially letting you know, when you look at some of the surrounding jurisdictions, when you look at what DCPD is doing, when you look at what Brookhaven and Dunwoody are doing, when you look at the fact that you may decide based upon strategic priorities to have a lower number of officers, maybe you just want the basic services provided, and then you may look at a cooperation agreement with another jurisdiction for some of the other ancillary services that can be provided. So what this does just gives you an idea of what the cost would be associated based upon whatever strategic priority that you want to focus in on. However, it just basically kind of gives you room to modify that, but also knowing what the cost would be. So the middle cost estimate is basically the share-based cost. That when you look at what the share of services provided by DCPD and how that would be transferred to your particular area, gives you the middle estimate of about 11.5 million. And so if you set up traffic court, minus the operating expenses, some of that will be offset by about $300,000, just a little over that. But if you decided that you wanted to go with either the low, the middle, or the high cost estimate, we're giving you, what those estimates would be, dollars needed to be generated by property tax. But then we provide an estimate in terms of what the mills, what mills would be needed in order to meet that particular threshold in that regard. And so again, estimates, but just to kind of give you a general idea of if you went a particular direction, what the cost would be, what are some of the options associated with and creating that revenue, but then also looking at some of the other variables, as we mentioned earlier, that should be taken into account. And so obviously some of the potential benefits would be that as opposed to relying upon a different jurisdiction, that you actually have an agreement with to provide policing. Having your own gives you strategic control and overall ability to program police activities. If you want to do standard traffic control, or if you want to, in terms of community engagement, whether you wanted to do community-oriented policing, but this gives you more flexibility in terms of shaping public safety services around what your specific needs and concerns are. Allows you to set the priorities, manage response times to meet the needs of your constituency. Obviously, human resources would be a strong part of it in terms of the benefits of it. You can also gives you more focus and more power to manipulate or to address issues with efficiencies associated with fixed costs and slack time. You know, some of the services that your other departments need or provide that also become ancillary services for your policing unit. It allows you to kind of maximize some of their slack time and some of the fixed costs associated with that. And it also provides some overall synergy throughout the organization as you kind of merge all the strategic priorities of the different departments together. So some of the considerations would be the annual costs overall are going to fall within those estimates. Just kind of depends on the size of the department you decide to go with, what specialized services, what skills that you want to go with. Depending upon what direction you go in terms of your level of specificity, there may be some requirements for some additional funds, but a lot of that can be projected. Some of the newer cities in DeKalb that established their own police departments actually spent more liberally. That was a focus on their end, a higher cost per officer. Recruited and hired more experienced officers to focus in on quality. And but most of the cities in DeKalb overall provide police services in-house. I guess one thing I want to draw your attention to is that all over the state, and I mean, it'd be hard for me to come up with a place that I've been that did not have this issue, as they're having a lot of issues around the state overall with police officer retention. When you look at it, some of them will say, well, you know, going back many, many years, there's a competition sometimes about providing more or higher entry-level salaries. There's been a lot of class compensation studies to make a local jurisdiction or local municipality more competitive in terms of providing salaries. But it goes much further into that. As you know, policing has just become a more difficult job in terms of the social pressures. You have a lot of the demographic conflicts, age conflicts. One of the things that we have found that's regularly taking place is that you have certain individuals that have been around 15, 20, 25 years. And so they're vested in a particular city, vested in a particular area. And so you get someone new that comes along and they get a certain salary and there's a competition there, but then the newer person can leave at any moment to then go to the new jurisdiction for a few more $1,000s, whereas the person that's vested in a particular area doesn't feel as comfortable with that because oftentimes they have to start over. And so there's a lot of competition and a lot of challenges around the state in terms of police officer recruitment, police officer retention, and some of the mental health and social issues associated with that. And so there also has to be, you know, some significant focus on the mental health issues associated with officers if you decide to go in that particular direction. And so those are some of the basic considerations, and just kind of want to open it up for questions. Again, you know, we have a lot of different numbers throughout the report, and a lot of it still comes down to, we gave you the high end, the lower end. Most of it still comes down to what your strategic priorities are. So there are a lot of benefits, and some of the drawbacks just have to kind of be taken into account as you move forward. So I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, council, having heard Mr. Watkins' report, I have one
Yes, sir.
question, not for you, for Mr. Bale.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Who is on the Public Safety Committee?
I am on it, the mayor, Councilman Clanton, Barbara Hall, Chief of Police for Dunwoody, Billy Grogan, the Chief of Police for South Fulton, who is Keith Meadows, and Atlanta's former chief and Clayton County's former CEO, Elbert Bell.
Thank you. Well, the reason I asked that is because I wanted to see who the numbers person was, because there's some numbers in here that I had questions about, and that is when you talked about the city millage rate needed in order to make this work. So who is responsible for calculating that?
Are you speaking from the committee standpoint or the Carl Vincent?
For this report, from the committee standpoint, whoever has that information.
We basically,
Numbers came from Carl Vincent, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Now, Carl Vincent, is that the case?
Well, we have these numbers based upon the 2019 City of basically M&O digest on file with the Georgia Department of Revenue. And we based that upon some of the numbers they gave us and then made a projection on what would be a general number of mills needed in order to produce this amount of money by property tax.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's numbers that we provided, but we also got these from the Georgia Department of Revenue.
Okay. Then with that, I wanted to know when you came in with the, what did you call it? You call it the low end, the low cost, the medium cost, and the high cost.
Yes.
So the medium cost, does that consider that is what we are receiving now from DeKalb County, medium?
Yes, I would say that'd be the closest number in terms of a comparable cost.
Yes.
In terms of what you're currently receiving, but that would also take into account all of the services they're providing in terms of basic levels, but also the specialized units. So that would be closer to what you're already receiving. If you decided to go out on your own on that one, then there'd probably need to be some further clarification on if you wanted to provide all those services yourselves, or if you wanted to go to a lower number and then just had a cooperating agreement with them to provide the special units. And then that way you could kind of pull from a menu basically of what it is that you'd want to actually include in that.
And in order to get the medium service, if I'm reading this correctly, the city millage rate would have to go to 7.19.
To produce that on your own, yes.
Okay. And can you calculate how much that would cost the average citizen with a $200,000 house?
I can. I don't have that in front of me right now, but I will pull that up for you and I will send that to you.
Okay. Okay, I'll have some more as I go through this, but other council members, you have questions?
And Mr. Turner, if I can get your email address, I will have someone, we'll make sure we get that information to you.
Okay, good.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, may I?
have.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, who's speaking?
Go ahead, Mr. Bell.
No, Councilwoman, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
You know, I just want to cut through the chase and ask you this question, Mr. Mr.
Malik is good.
Malik. In your travels and in your dealings with, I'm sorry, that was my corn pill. I have a headache. I'm sorry. Ooh, I didn't even have that on my head. In your dealings with other municipalities, have you ever been asked directly, do you believe we can afford it? Based on what you've done, have you ever been asked that question?
I get asked that question pretty regularly.
Okay. Okay.
And I will tend to tell you my answer generally is that while I focus in on critical thinking and producing projects such as this, the one thing I don't do is to pretend I know more about the local priorities than an elected official representing a particular municipality. And because there are a lot of other priorities that have to be taken into account in this regard. So I do get asked that question a lot, but the general answer tends to be that I'm not really in a position to say that, because typically what I do is develop a consensus based upon numbers and then pull out of the governing body, the policymaking body on what is affordable and what is not.
Okay, that's a safe answer. Thank you.
No, because the bottom line is, I go different places and a lot of times I'll get that specific question, but the one thing one of the reasons why all of this works is because, I don't spend as much time in Stonecrest as you, nor am I aware of the political realities that you all face. And so in a lot of ways, I come in and provide a very specific service, but I also know not to overstep my boundaries, because that's when you get into trouble, acting like you know someone else's reality better than they do.
Well, just wanted to ask in case there was some confirmation or something. All right,
Councilwoman
thank
Brown,
you.
you didn't
Thank
quite
you.
come through that time.
I just said thank you, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Gotcha.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Pro
Anyone
Tem.
else?
May I ask a question, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Watkins, when you came up with the 7.92 or some of the other millage rates, did you all consider the SPLOST dollars that could go into especially your upstart, the startup portions of your police department?
No, we just did that as a separate number, but definitely in terms of implementation, whatever SPLOST dollars that you could get in terms of setting that up and functioning would then have to be made in terms of outside of that. This was kind of just a straightforward number on this is the amount needed to be generated and this is the mill associated with it. But if there are other ways to reduce that mill, then we did not necessarily include that, and that would certainly be at your discretion and probably advisable.
Okay. I also had a question regarding your time spent on calls. Did you all take into consideration the difference in size? For example, if you look at the East Precinct, it's 82 square miles versus Stonecrest at around 38 square miles. When you calculated the time on call, was that once that officer arrived to that call, or was it once he got the radio call saying, I've got a, incident on Covington Highway? So where does that time start?
Generally it starts when they get there.
When they get there, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's what.
Yeah.
All right.
Is there anyone else?
I do have a question. Maybe I missed it, and I'll ask Dr. Watkins this in reference to, I guess, time also. I was told that police respond according to the severity of the call. So if we're looking at something that's not so severe, are we looking at that in reference to times for them going to calls or time of them accepting calls? How are we looking at that? The severity of the call?
So you're asking me, or do we calculate it based upon the, excuse me, the severity of the issue at hand, or?
Yeah. Yes, like if I got a trespassing issue and then there's somebody just got shot. So obviously the person that got shot would have priority over the trespassing issue. So did we look at that in reference to response time also, or how are we looking at that?
Most of it is just looking at an overall average of when the person actually got there. In terms of the response times, that isn't necessarily factored in as much. So we focus more in on call on time, but then there are also ways to kind of shift how you want to manage that. And that's where you kind of get into some of the benefits of actually taking control of your situation, is how you determine or how you instruct the police department to respond in that regard.
Gotcha. Okay.
But also when you look at different jurisdictions, you find that there are different ways that they manage calculating response times. And that's when we start to get into some of the political conflicts associated with each one, and how certain communities don't feel as though their issues are being effectively handled versus some of the other communities.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
So Malik, I didn't get a chance to look at some of the report. This is Councilman Clanton. I did read through a lot of it, but when you were compiling this report, you got two different millage rates that would be passed along. One is the 4.92 on the low end, and then on the high end is 9.73, which I'm assuming it will match up with the high end of the services provided. And then you also compared us with Dunwoody, I think, because Dunwoody or Brookhaven would have the closest population, plus they do both have new police forces, since they became new cities. So when you look at those numbers, in regards to feasibility, how would you rate Stonecrest? I know you did say that each city have to set their own priorities, but generally speaking, looking at our budget, I don't know how familiar are you with that, but how would you consider Stonecrest rate wise, compared to Dunwoody and Brookhaven, I shouldn't say rate wise, I should say readiness to move towards a police force?
I'd say most of it comes down to something that you would probably be more aware of, which would be the political readiness and acceptance. Like, for instance, you have certain communities that are overall calling for their own police departments because of some of the tension that exists between a particular municipality and the county. And so obviously, and actually just kind of be straight with you, a lot of that is kind of what I end up seeing sometimes, is there's a certain tension that takes place. In areas where there isn't as much attention and it's more exploratory, there tends to be not as much readiness. Just to give you an example, there are certain areas or certain municipalities around the country that have actually passed property tax increases because the community wanted more arts. And so here you have a community that's willing to vote to pay more taxes because they want more art funding. And so, you know, that's a particular dynamic. That's a certain community that's been prepared to go in that particular direction. And so, you know, to get more specific with your question, a lot of that comes down to what your knowledge of the political readiness would be in your particular area on whether or not the community is really calling for their own police department because of some existent tension or some incompatibilities with the policing policy of DeKalb County versus in terms of what your local area is and whether that's considered as succeeding or failing, whether the police department sometimes demographically or the overall strategic orientation is associated or matches up with the particular needs of those communities, whether there's enough problem-oriented policing or community-oriented policing. You know, is there a significant kickback in terms of response times? You know, as the council member mentioned, how are response times calculated? Obviously, if you hear a gunshot, then that's going to be one type of response. If it's just kind of trespassing or breaking and entering, then that may be a different type of response, or the difference between property crimes and violence. And so a lot of it comes down to what are the types of crimes that are prevalent in the community and how much information has the community actually received about the prevalent crimes, but then also what is the perceived relationship between your particular area and the county overall. And so in that particular instance, I would say that I don't know enough specifically about what is taking place or have not talked to enough people in terms of the citizenry to make an intelligent comment on that. I think that in this particular instance, you all would probably be the better judges or assessors of what that relationship actually is and what the expectations of your constituency actually is.
Do your report include any information in regards to what we're currently spending for policing through an IGA with DeKalb County? And part of the reason for that question is I noticed that you mentioned in the report that cities like Dunwoody and Brookhaven have a tendency to actually spend more money for policing than the county did. So, so I do get the point, and you make a very good point that our priorities should be set by the desires of our citizens. And, so when the citizens want more policing and they're willing to, make up the difference, certainly we should probably look at policing as set it in its proper place and its priorities. But, just strictly dealing with the numbers, I was just trying to get my, my hand around some of these numbers in regards to our current IGA and the increased costs. And, if there's a meal that we can sort of pull down from the county that will cover part of the meals that we may even require or that we will require.
Yeah. I'd say if you look on page 13 of the copy that I have, but overall it'd be table 5. And this is basically the kind of tabulation of the cost share estimate, which if you look at the basic uniform division costs and you add in the specialized units, which would be intelligence and criminal investigation, SWAT, K9, aerial, and so forth. And the grand total that from the DCPD that we would ascribe in terms of the cost of their services that they're providing to you would be somewhere around 13 mil. Now, if you start to, as you mentioned, look at what could be done to modify that, then you could go with a lower cost estimate, which still puts you within some of the best practices in terms of the amount of numbers, where you would just look at what would be the basic uniform division, some of the basic standard patrols, and then you could do an IGA with DCPD or an adjacent jurisdiction to kind of then look at some of the specialized services and so forth. But overall, we put a cost estimate for the total package around $13 million. But if you wanted to kind of modify that and go with some basic services, then that would give you a lot of leeway in terms of looking at what some of the specialized services are based upon what your knowledge of your actual needs are in terms of your particular area.
Thank you, sir. All right.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Let me just float back to the numbers again. And I know we're gonna have to get someone else to help us through this. But there was a number in here that said that Stonecrest is 10.46% of the population of DeKalb County. Maybe my math is off, but I didn't realize we were that much. And that's the number you use to determine how much revenue you think we would derive from the traffic court. So I just need to get someone to go. That's why I ask about who's on the committee or who has worked with you on these numbers, because I'll just say straight up to you is that I believe everybody wants the police department for the city of Stonecrest, but they want to know, can we afford it? And not just for 1 year either. It's got to be long term. So we've got to know that the numbers make sense and it's something that we can afford long term. So I'll have to work on these numbers again. But in my studies about running a city, I was cautioned that we should not use traffic court as a means of revenue. And a lot in here is based on that, because the objective is to get people to stop violating the law. And that should be zero when we have a utopia where nobody speeds or breaks the law in any fashion, and we will collect zero.
Right.
So to build your budget on that is to suggest that you are, I don't want to say, well, you're counting on people to break the law so you can collect the fee. And I've been cautioned that that might be a little bit unethical.
Yeah, because we start to wonder if you all are setting up speed traps in Stonecrest in order to fund all these types of things. But just kidding on that. But
I didn't say that.
We included that, and I agree with you, sir, is that should not be relied upon as a primary funding mechanism. But some of these things we included just because we usually get asked about them. Because sometimes there's this notion that, we can just set up our own traffic court and we'll generate that revenue and to help offset what the overall costs are. But when, and that tends to be a public perception. But as you mentioned, sir, when we start to dig through the actual numbers that are created and the costs that are generated by setting it up, it tends to be a very ineffective way to fund policing, but then also it fluctuates over time and kind of sends the wrong message, as you mentioned, to trying to fund these activities based upon that when we're trying to get people to stop. So definitely agreed, but we include it just because it usually gets asked.
Yeah, and that's very, very, very good that it was included, so it can set out from the onset that that this whole feasibility study is not even based on the notion of a traffic court. I think the net gain for traffic court on an annual basis, according to this report, was about $315,000 compared to $13 million a year on the high end, and like almost $8 million on the low end. So 300,000 ain't gonna even put a dent into the cost of operation. So so really this would be a citizen sponsored, as in most cases, as far as I know, in regards to policing, it's all really, citizen sponsored, city sponsored by some means, and even the SPLOST money, it has a time stamp on it. It's not like forever. So it has to be a commitment.
Yes, definitely. And as you mentioned, that 315 would barely fund 3 officers, and we're talking about at the bare minimum. So when we start talking about what will be necessary for an entire police force, especially if you start to include some of the specialized units, then it becomes really something that's quite nominal in terms of the contribution overall.
Okay.
Mr.
Anything
Mayor,
else? Anyone? Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, you mentioned 10%, and that was the same question that I had. I emailed it, and Dr. Watkins, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I was told that 10% was the 10% of the population was based on the area served by DeKalb Police. So you would have to take out of the population the city of Decatur because they have their own police department, the city of Doraville, the city of Dunwoody. And then, so that's where that 10% came from, because that stood out to me as well. And that was the response that I got.
Yeah, I kind of figured that, but as you read through the report, it still mentions the 750,000 citizens for DeKalb County. So I was thinking if they were going to say unincorporated DeKalb, they would have used a different number than the 750. But those are the numbers we need so we can discuss them and go through them and be ready when the time comes to have some intelligent conversation about starting our own police force. And we are armed with the information. And Dr. Watkins, I thank you for your time. I don't know if your work is done here, but we know where to find you.
Indeed, and I think I had my, let's see if I got my, I want to make sure you have my email address. I know Mr. Bell does. Let me see here.
If he has it, we have it.
Okay, yeah, so anytime you need some additional conversation, malik@uga.edu, but anytime you need some additional clarifications, conversation, or just want to talk about gumbo in Savannah and how we make it here versus in Brunswick, either way, please feel free to hit me up. As I said, I don't really spend any time in Athens. I spend all my time out in the field. So one of the pleasures I have is working with people like you all to help you achieve your priorities. So if I don't have the answer, I certainly know where to get it. So anything I can do, just let me know.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate you, sir. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
All right. The presentation was for information only. The next item for information will be the collaborative firm zoning updates for information only at this time.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Turner, Michael Hightower. Hopefully you guys are doing well this evening. And I'm joined by, first I'm joined by Nicolette Washington, who's been working alongside Michelle Alexander for the duration of this project. And we're also joined by Casey Kurzik, who's a member of our firm who has rejoined us. She worked with us a few years ago. She's now joined us again, and she has of course a wealth of experience in this field. So Michelle Alexander is going to be making the presentation, and before she begins, I just want to kind of recap where we are. And I also want to thank Chris Wheeler and Players Joyner for their assistance throughout this process on your staff and answering questions, etc. Essentially, the engagement that started several months ago is the city's desire to update its current zoning ordinance. And of course, that includes a few categories of work. In addition to the overall project orientation, it also involves a public participation process that we have essentially broken out into primary focus groups by this being a zoning ordinance that Michelle will talk about later. Well, also, that process also has entailed our firm updating the website quarterly. One of the critical parts is the analysis and the assessment of the existing ordinance that Michelle will talk about. And following that would be a drafting of the existing of the new zoning code, and of course a citywide zoning map, public hearing later on with the citywide map, and of course attending public meetings and also revising the final document before it's presented to you for consideration. I would also add, in a lot of the comments that Michelle has received has dealt with a variety of items, and as a former elected official, I've been paying close attention, and I think Ms. Cobble and others have raised several questions regarding some of the old DeKalb text amendments that Michelle has researched, and also we pay special attention, Mr. Turner. This evening, we had a briefing today with Michelle, Casey, and I at length about certain uses that we, of course, are going to continue to look at that should require a special land use permit process. And I think obviously some things have happened over the past several months that is making us, challenging us to look at things a lot more closely. As Michelle comes on, we are happy to provide this update. And Michelle will give a very thorough process, and feel free to stop her as she goes along. And finally, I think this process is very similar to what we're doing right now throughout the region. On the line with us on the phone, whether it's Casey Kurzik, she's in the process as we speak of leading the effort with support of Michelle. The City of Stockbridge zoning ordinance, we approved for that. The City of Park zoning ordinance. And we're also involved with the City of Roswell as they're doing their code as well. So we have a lot of experience throughout the region in this process. So Michelle, I'm going to be quiet, Mr. Turner, and leave it to her if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Michelle?
Good evening, Mayor and Council and Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for the time today. If I may, can I share my screen? I would walk through a presentation if I could. Bear with me when I select it and make sure I get the right view. So what you have in your packets was, let's see, let me back up. In your packets, you have the report from a little while ago where we had put some preliminary options for the city to consider. As you know, we've been having a series of meetings with the community, with different focus groups, also interviews with elected officials, and discussing with the Planning Commission as well as staff. So we have moved forward from those preliminary viewpoints that were shared, and we're going to walk through where we are today and get some feedback from you. Just as a reminder, as Mr. Hightower was sharing the scope, what we were assigned to do, sorry about that, what we were assigned to do to establish a baseline. First of all, you as a city since 2017, you've made several amendments already to your code. You made some updates to it to refine it, make it meet your needs. There's about 10, 12 of those. So just consolidating that took a bit of time, and that's where we spent the first efforts. We've met with we've met with all of the council, and we thank you for your time on that. We're working to schedule with you to meet with you again and to continue hearing from you your policy preferences. We've reviewed studies, we put together and have been implementing a meeting with the community. We've had stakeholder focus groups. So we've been meeting so that we could have a more inclusive, broader range from all the members in the different focus groups instead of just a few select folks. We're meeting with the focus groups. We'll walk through who some of these different groups are. And we were tasked to do a complete analysis to look at the code and to look at your zoning map. And those are the results from the external, if you will, from the just looking from planning principles down. What does it look like on the code, and what does the map look like? What does it look like and compared to what your adopted comprehensive plan says, what your land use policy says? We've done that, and a complete and thorough analysis, though, requires testing that and vetting that and working with stakeholders' experiences. So the analysis, I'm showing that that's essentially where we are. We're wrapping up and continuing to speak with stakeholders and with you all to complete the full analysis. As a time frame, you see where the arrow is, that we have been going through these meetings. We have prepared a couple of reports. We have not yet started drafting any updates. We have not actually written any text of the ordinance because we need your blessing. We need to continue to wrap up what we're hearing from the community. So we're not at that stage yet. That's coming up. And once we do start putting together that draft, we're going to be coming back to the Planning Commission and to you several times to make sure that this is making sense and working for you. We had one of the meetings we had was with the community on October 22nd. You had about 130 participants at that meeting. It was a great turnout. And I refer you to the zoning code update webpage. This is on the city webpage under the zoning code, the zoning section. And you have the results of that meeting. You have all of the questions and comments that participants raised. In summary, there was several questions about why are we updating the zoning ordinance? So on the right-hand side of the screen, you see what we were charged to do, what the city instructed the consultant team to do, the collaborative firm. And on the left-hand side, though, there's some of that translation because folks were saying, what is our intent and what is it that the city is trying to get out of this update? In short, there's, first of all, the fact that this is a code that was adopted from DeKalb, essentially. And DeKalb County has a lot wider range of needs and land uses and geographies than the city necessarily. And it's a large code. I mean, this is a 347-page document. So we've spent a lot of time just going through all of those 347 pages to look at what you've asked us to do. What are the needs of this code? A big piece that came out too from staff, from users, from your applicants is to make better definitions, make it clearer, make it easier to make sense. Don't have language that leaves your staff guessing at what is your policy intent. So those are a lot of what we're going to be discussing with you shortly. The update to the ordinance also is especially to make it easier to use. Organizing, cleaning up language, putting it in a format and in a delivery that is a lot more intuitive is mission critical. When we did a survey, a little sort of a mini survey with the folks who were at the community meeting, about a third of the community that had used the code, a third of them said it's difficult to use. So there's a need there. If a third of the folks who have to use the code are struggling with it, then that's something important to take time to improve on. And then on the policy side, does this zoning code, do these zoning districts, do they deliver what your city vision is, what you've adopted as your policy for growth and development? So those are the whys. The code is very thorough. It's got a lot of sophistication to it, but this update is meant to make it, to improve where needed. Some of the folks were concerned about any changes to residential districts. Short answer, no. The intent is not to touch any of the substance, to not change residential districts. In fact, there are some pieces of the recommendations we're considering with you is actually to better protect the neighborhoods. And then we talked about, I guess, ways to make it easier to use, to have those definitions, which are important, to do the research and understand modern uses and some of the new businesses that are either desired or are coming into the city. Also to provide graphics and do some cleanup. And then the better intent of the city policy, again, that has to do with your policy. And one of the reasons you became a city was to have more public involvement and that transparency. And so one of the biggest comments we got back from input and from our participation efforts is to really expand public notification, to enhance ways that the community can be informed ahead of time, and also to be involved more intensely when a project comes in. So that's the why behind the work that you have asked us to do. So the how are we going about it? Well, as we engage with the community in multiple different ways, we wanted to sort of show the buckets of the different groups that we've been talking with and having one-on-one and in-depth conversations with. So everything from your staff, the folks who are taking in applications and working with applicants, your planning commission, your economic development staff is of course important because again, how does the zoning code get you the growth and development that you want? That's what we're looking at. We're so pleased to have the time for the folks of the Arabian Mountain Alliance and to have subsequent follow-up conversations with them. We have reached out to leadership in the HOAs, and we're looking to do another round to meet with HOA leadership. We've already had one community meeting, like I mentioned, on the 22nd, and thank you for all of those who attended that and provided feedback. We've met with the Stonecrest Business Alliance. We're looking to ask for additional meetings. Some of the folks at those meetings offered to have interviews and can continue to give us one-on-one information. We're grateful for that. And then of course, your industrial stakeholders. We've had 2 meetings. We've requested a third. All of these important employment and investors in your community want to make sure we work with the range and these specific areas. And then the work has included analysis as well as research, the assessment of your recent studies, and also really working with your staff about what kind of businesses are coming in and what kind of businesses do you want, checking what kind of variances have been happening, and then also checking with, through this process of public engagement, what is the experience on the ground, and vetting some of of our observations. So the summary status where we are is we did complete that consolidation of all of the amendments and incorporated that. We've generated these 2 reports. One of the reports are in your packets, but it's really looking now to where we've moved forward, and we want to share some of our results from the input from the community. We've had several meetings throughout the month of October, and we're scheduling to see through the next few weeks additional stakeholder discussions. So getting into the meat of it, and what I'd like to do through the rest of this presentation is discuss with you what's in the report, some of the recommendations, check in with you if you have comments, direction you want to give us, and we'll continue through this to hear from you. Even as we've spoken with some of you, we've spoken with all of you individually, but this is we're looking forward to hear you discuss it, and as a body, bless the work we've prepared or give us additional direction. First of all, we talked about making the code easier to use. The fatter that a 347-page document is big, and the more you can call out things that you're not using, the more efficient you can use the document. So one of the analysis we did out of the gate was to see if there's any zoning districts on the books that you aren't using. And as a matter of fact, there are a couple of zoning districts, the office institutional transitional, that's a zoning district that you don't have properties zoned to that. You're not using it. There doesn't seem to be a demand for it, and it isn't being used in your jurisdiction. And that's not surprising, because that's really more for where there's a decline or an aging housing residential area that is transitioning from housing to offices. So my house is changing, and I'm going to open up a real estate office in my residential structure. It's designed for neighborhoods that are in transition. Another district that we don't see being used in the city is the residential large lot. So you have you have residential estate lots, which are large lots, and you have a lot of R100 lots, the 100-foot width residential lots, but you don't have this additional category in use right now. And while you have, there is an existence mobile home parks, they are currently on property zoned M as industrial, but you don't have this as a district. So those 3 we're recommending. It's one way to cull and give your code a diet. You have about, I want to say it's 37 different zoning districts in effect. So if they're not in use, it's a way to clean the code. The report that you have recommended considering your high density residential, considering if you needed those. But the input that we've received and considering about your potential growth was to leave those as is. So I'm mentioning it because you do have that in the report to consider it. I'm presenting back to you, letting you know the feedback on it and the further analysis of it, that it seems, especially around the area of the mall, that this might be a place to have some standalone residential. Now with the mixed use districts, you have 5 currently on the books, you have 5 mixed districts. And when we compare that to what your comprehensive plan outlines for your different intensities, the activity centers, the centers of your neighborhood, your city, and your regional scale, since that's what your comprehensive plan has as sort of the demarked categories of mixed use areas of the city. If you wanted to line up that your zoning district lined up with your policy, then it makes sense that you would just have 3 instead of these 5 with the gradation. So that was one, another proposal we were recommending to you. Our study looked at your zoning map, you see that on the left-hand side, to the future land use map. And recall that a future land use map just has a handful of land use categories. It's the big picture of land use types. The zoning district on the left-hand side, the zoning map is more granular, and it's also where your regulations come in. So we compared how the zoning code matched up or didn't match up with your future land use map. We also prepared a chart so that when an applicant comes to you and says, hey, I want the zoning district, we'll check, or your staff can check and see, does that category of land use the future land use map, does that match up? Is that compatible with the zoning district that you're proposing? So this is a sort of a housekeeping matter, but just so you recognize it when you see it, why it looks different than what your current code has, because we are updating it to match your comprehensive plan. Now I know this is small to see and hard to see, but as we did that check, everywhere you see the circle and a little call out box, that's a document that we have for you where we identified, look, these are areas where the future land use map looks different than what the zoning is. One obvious place, I know it's been in discussion, is here in the north east side, where we have some teeth of residential, if you will, some slivers of residential properties in the midst of industrial. Your future land use map actually calls that out as being industrial for the future. Is there action to take? Not necessarily. You have some folks making recommendations to consider maybe through economic development, how to manage that or address it or be prepared for maybe any changes coming in if those property owners decide to. Many of those properties are being actually used as pretty heavy commercial uses. So the actual use is not necessarily incompatible with the surrounding, but there are still some residential there. Another example we pulled out down, I don't know if you can see with my cursor towards the bottom of the screen, small place on Klondike, a small intersection in some ways, but it's in such an important area. This is in the area of the Arabia Mountain overlay. It's the one place where your future land use map identified a small area to have neighborhood commercial. So very low scale, low intensity commercial. What we're showing you and making you aware of through our documentation is that your zoning map actually has that area, a couple of those parcels as C2, a heavier commercial use. And I know a couple of these parcels are built out, but several of them are not. And also to have on our radar that quadrant on the southwest side, your zoning has it as residential, and your future land use map says, but this node might be the right place to have a little neighborhood commercial. So that's a question of, in the report, we had talked about, you might want to consider working with the property owners to see if you wanted to make that change proactively. Speaking with the folks from the Arabia Mountain Alliance, that didn't seem to be the best direction to go. Why not wait until an applicant comes and allow it to take its course through the public process? If someone does want to come in, well, the future land use map, as we showed here, the future land use map supports a neighborhood commercial. But if it goes through the public process, then you know you can get in your conditions and your discussion. Alternatively, we could have a process, and we'll put in that recommendation to consider a process of coming up with what kind of design or restrictions would even make sense. And that might be something you want to add to your overlay, to the Arabia Mountain Overlay District. Aside from that, the feedback and the observation is that the overlay is working as it needs to, and no need to do anything additional. The Stonecrest area overlay, you've spent a lot of time on it. You've had a lot of stakeholders working last year, and you all adopted some amendments to your Stonecrest area overlay. As the team looked at it, we originally saw over where the Stonecrest Mall is, you have that intensity area. And we were looking at the future land use map calls out that entire area as a regional activity center. And so the report you have in front of you suggested you consider reducing those number of tiers and expanding that intensity a little further south from the mall. Speaking with some of your stakeholders from the business community, they didn't see that they wanted to do any kind of consolidation, that it was preferred to leave as is those tiers and the intensity. Plus there was comments about the market isn't really supporting it right now, that kind of intensity. So let's keep it focused more immediately adjacent to the mall. However, the report you have in front of you does ask you to consider tier 5. And I'm going to go in a little bit, zoom in. Tier 5 of that overlay is the light colored here that is all residential. It's currently zoned, the underlying zoning, the base zoning is R100. What the overlay does in this case, for this tier, it actually expands that residential. It expands and allows by right, without having to go through a public process or any special process. It would be just the property owner has the right for a whole range of additional uses that are not residential. And I did want to pause on this just to make sure everyone's aware of this provision with the Stonecrest overlay. So this means in all of these, this is of all of these properties. So up here is I-20, this red area is the mall. We're going south towards Arabia Mountain, which is the green area. This light color in here is allowed under your overlay to have non-residential uses like retail. And it doesn't distinguish by size. Any kind of retail could go there except for, it's excluding drive-through as you see on the screen. But you could have all this non-residential office, personal services, personal care facilities, childcare facilities. And by facility, it means like a daycare center, not just someone having a childcare services in their home. And that was something we recommended you consider removing. If you want to keep it residential, or if you want to make sure any non-residential comes before you and is a public process, then you might want to consider, as we recommend, to remove these residential from the overlay or change what these uses are, because that's a little more intense than it seems you want, especially adjacent to the Arabian Mountain overlay. It's putting some pretty intense uses potentially adjacent to it. If there's any comments on that one, we'd love to hear any comments that you want to share about this point. And if you're already aware of it and this isn't something you want us to touch, please let us know that as well.
I do have a comment and a question. Looking at the map, can you tell us, as near as you can, what are these streets that are along the borders, just for clarity? So starting where the arrow is, that street that runs along there, I know we're a ways off from Turner Hill Road, appears to be, but it looked like we're on Hayden Quarry and maybe look like we're going down near Klondike.
Yeah, so Hayden is, let's see if I can do, can you see that? Whoopsie, sorry about that.
I did see it before. Yeah, I see your cursor.
Yeah, so
That's Hayden Court.
This is Hayden right here.
That's Hayden Core.
Yes.
Okay. All right, but we're only talking about the light yellow areas though.
Just this yellow area, just this, yeah, and it's all zoned R100. And if Nikki's on the line, Nikki, is there anything I'm missing in my communications of this?
No, I don't think so. I think, yeah, these parcels are zoned, R100, which is a pretty large, low density residential zoning. And we just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that, you know, these non-residential uses are permitted by right in this area, because we're kind of hearing that's not what you want. So
could you
just looking for
point to
direction.
Klondike at the roundabout?
So this is Klondike.
The roundabout. That is where District 1, District 5 sort of meets at. It's a roundabout at Klondike and
Rockland.
Rockland.
That's
So
further
that's
down.
down. Oops, sorry with my arrow. Down here, this is Rockland.
Okay, good. So now come right where your arrow cursor is. That's a community there. Look like Stonecrest Heights. Is that correct? Come over some. So yeah, right. Go back to your right or to the right on the screen. Come back and go above the green, right there, and go up. That community. That's in that yellow area as well. Is that correct? That's tier 5 as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so adjacent to that community, based on the uses that we have now, we can put, say, for instance, adult daycare, not like home style, but a real building, bed and breakfast where there's land available. But if you look from there all the way to the roundabout, there's really no property available at this time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but controlling the growth and what we want there in the future, we should consider that. Office uses and personal care facilities, churches, medical facilities, which may actually be not a bad usage for that area, considering the aging population in and around there.
Yeah.
Bed and breakfast is not too bad, considering the fact that it's coming off of the Mall Parkway. So yeah, it's just something that we would definitely have to look into. As you know, we did have a committee that actually, you know, the overlay committee looked at this specifically, as well as the Arabian Mountain group as well, since it abated the, but up to Arabian Mountain, the green area. So we had several discussions about this, and we probably would need to continue that discussion at some point. So certainly I would like to circle back around with you guys specifically about this area, the closer to Klondike particularly, and then also near, I'm assuming that's like McDaniel Mills up there somewhere.
Yeah, and it may be just some qualifiers about the scale. So the uses may be, I know one of the stakeholders said, you know, we looked at that and we wanted to have, you know, the scale, you know, as long as it was within scale. So maybe we just need to give you some ways to limit and have the proper scale for this location, even if you do want to, if you decide to keep all those uses.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Michelle, hi, it's Tammy Grimes. Just want to ask you, and you can get it to me at a later date.
Okay.
But for the yellow area, I'd like for you to tell me exactly all of the streets that affect District 5. Okay. So you can get that to me later, but yeah, my eyes won't allow me to do it so much with this rendering. So if you could do that, make a note and get that to me, I would greatly appreciate it. And then I can get you a lot of questions.
Understood. And and we can share that with everyone to zoom in better, to communicate it better. Thank you for that.
All right.
Request.
Thank you.
Get clear. All right. So I'm just reminding you of where we are again. So the next slide after this, we're going to focus in on the on a northwest side, where so I-20. I'm just going to go back here. So you see where we are. We're up here by I-20 and this part of the city, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This is where the I-20 overlay district is. It does seem to meet your needs. A couple of things we recommended. One is the code still has a tier 3 in it, but tier 3 is actually in the DeKalb side. It's not in our city limit. So that's just housekeeping, I would say. We want to clear up the language, make it a lot more explicit about how to promote mixed use development. All along I-20 and also for the industrial areas, we are asked to really define allowing film industry. So just for example, if there's production there to make sure that temporary residential is allowed for those who are serving those studio sites, for example, or other things that the film industry needs. So we want to put that in the code to invite that, make it as easy as possible. We also are recommending to add guidelines.
Michelle,
Yes.
are you talking about trailers and different things such as that for people to stay in? And what are you talking about in reference to them living there or staying there?
So what is the best, short-term residential for when the staff or the crew and the actors are on a film studio site. It's a unique mix of uses that are going to be on a film site than any of our other sites. So if you want those industries, we recommend that you allow uses that we typically won't allow in any other,
Right, absolutely. I see what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And of course, that's working closely with your economic development folks, who are doing that recruitment, make sure we're getting it right.
Exactly, okay.
We also recommend adding some additional design guidelines to this overlay.
So my question would be, does those type uses, does they have to be described in our zoning, or could that just be permitting, as opposed to zoning? So for instance, like right now in the city of Stonecrest, as Councilman Rob Turner will probably agree with, is that the biggest area now seems like for the movie industry is District 5. And in District 5, near New Birth Church and on Bill Allen properties, they use a lot of trailers. So, I don't know if that's by permit or by zoning.
Well, I know for a fact, Councilman, and I'm glad you brought that point up. It is by permit, because I get permits for every time there's something being shot or videotaped or filmed in our area, I get a permit for that. So it's primarily permitting. So are we looking at the same thing in reference to the question he just asked for the Interstate 20 overlay area?
It would be on top of what you have for your permits. You have that list of film permits that has a certain allowance. This would be more, for production houses that might have a permanent site as opposed to temporary sites of shooting.
Was that your question, Councilman?
No, I was talking about temporary facilities, and permanent sites for the movie industry. They may exist, but I don't know how permanent that would be. Right. But certainly, I think all zoning should provide for permitting as far as movie to facilitate our movie industry.
Right. I agree with you.
Councilmember, it's typically you get like a film movie permit for the right of way, so like streets, sidewalks, things like that. But then when you're talking private property, then that's when you would need a zoning permit. So for example, if there's like a private lot that the trailers are on, technically you would need a zoning permit for that. But then when you're filming on the street or the sidewalk, that's more of a special event city permit. So they work together.
So you still do need attorney, you still do need a permit even if it's private property. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, so the zoning process really only permits for private property. When you go into public property, that's a different permitting process. Gotcha. And so often with filming, it's sort of a combination of both. Right. And frankly, it really depends on, are they there long enough for people to complain about it? Because if they are and they don't have a zoning permit, then it can be an issue down the line. So it is best to just work that into the zoning ordinance so that it's not an issue down the line. Okay.
Right. I agree, because that's my entire point, is that we should not provide for zoning that will come against our movie industry build out. So we should, that should be relegated to permitting in my world, because that would help us within that industry, as opposed to having to put it in a zoning. And then just for, say it's a movie that's only going to be filming for 2 or 3 months, now you got to go through a zoning hearing to allow for trailers on private property. Or, you know, I don't think we should put ourselves in that position if we're going to be movie friendly.
I think the intent would be to have the zoning allow for it, and so they don't have to go through the process. So
Exactly.
in the override, the zoning would already allow for it, so they can just be there as of right. So they don't have to go through the zoning process, because technically the zoning does not allow for it. They would need to go through the zoning process.
And Michelle, is that what you're recommending?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
good, okay.
Yes.
And let me just say that we need a platform so we can work through details like this. And I think that's what's going to happen, is that not only for this type, but for other issues as well. We need a platform to work through them, because we could spend the whole evening here just on this one item. But Michelle, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
One of the sets of discussions in the report concerned looking at our industrial and our light industrial versus our heavy industrial zoning districts. And there are a number of items, if you look on the right-hand side where it says recommend, there are a number of uses in the light industrial that appear to really be more heavy industrial type uses. So we have been working with and speaking with the industrial business owners and property owners and their representative about these. We want to be very careful to not have any unintended consequences. You have some thriving businesses over, especially on Lithonia Industrial Boulevard and Snapfinger Woods, where you have undeveloped properties that are adjacent to residential, and you have the potential for very intense uses. We are recommending you consider requiring a special land use permit for those items on the right-hand side. I also want to be explicit where, for example, if you look down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets down where it says outdoor storage. By this, we mean only standalone. That is, we know you have many businesses that need and require outdoor storage as ancillary, as part of their operations that go into before the product or material goes into warehouses or into processing. What this is referring to is just standalone. And similarly, at the bottom, we talk about truck stops or terminals. In light industrial, to have standalone trucks, no other operations but a parking lot for freight trucks. We're recommending you consider special land use permit for that, or restricting it only to M2, to heavy industrial. It's a very intense use without a lot of employment generating activity or operations. So this list is, we're still looking at it with your business owners and those stakeholders, but we're also hearing from you and your community about some of the concerns about this intensity. At the very least, we are would like to draft for you criteria and land use standards. Currently, the code doesn't have use standards for recycling, and there's so many different types of recycling facilities. So you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but you do want to protect and make sure you get these uses in the right places. So we are recommending a special land use permit, or alternatively considering restricting them only to the heavy industrial area. On the left-hand.
Hey, Michelle, it's Jasmine.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know we talked about this briefly in our meeting, but this is so that my other council members know what I asked of you. Piggybacking off this kind of recommendation, to be able to see a list or a compilation of what the code looked like in DeKalb County for what required a SLUP, and how that maybe changed from let's see, 2017 when we adopted the DeKalb County Code, and we basically just adopted the exact same thing and then made modifications as time went along. But obviously DeKalb County had made modifications after 2017 as well. So we were modifying ours, they were modifying theirs, but at some point there was a break where they began to require SLUPs for certain applications, and we did not. So it became a situation where Stonecrest, was more susceptible to certain projects, because DeKalb County had went back and restricted it, but we had not picked up that restriction and carried along with us. So if there can be a compilation of where else they may have happened in the last few years,
yeah,
we can make sure we've kind of covered it all, and we can decide if we want to take those things or we don't. But obviously, our current situation has driven more attention to one specific use, and rather a SLUP or not. But there may be some other that weren't as provocative at the time, and I just don't want to overlook those either. So I just want to kind of let everybody know. I guess that wasn't a question for you, more of a comment,
clarification.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that everybody kind of knows. Yeah.
Right. It's to be have the bigger view of it. And I did go back to the DeKalb County Code to see any changes, any amendments that are recorded since 2017. And to be honest, the only code changes I found had to do with it was interesting. They added film production to light industrial. Sort of similar to what we're talking about tonight, adding film production. And they made some changes to their tier 3 of their Stonecrest overlay, that they're tier 3 on their side, to require SLUPs, a special land use permit for fuel pumps. But I didn't see anything else related to that. I do know that their code has for recycling, it is a special land use permit required. And so I'll leave it with that. But
so you've captured both of those, the fuel pumps and the recycling, cover material, processing. Both of those, or all three of those, are listed here already.
They are.
Okay.
They need better definitions, and it's something I'm asking to work with the industrial business owners and property owners to get these definitions that make sense. And to really parse it out, and to differentiate when you're next to residential versus when you're next to another industrial.
Right.
That's the right place for a lot of that, right? The industrial park. So it's not to, it's to strike the balance. That's right. That's the intent.
Now, did DeKalb County make any changes to their definitions?
I did not see that. Now,
okay.
This is going through their code and looking at all their text amendments that have been ratified through 2019.
Okay.
The thing I saw in 2020 had to do with COVID. So I haven't seen, but there may be a delay. So I want to talk with staff, and I still have to get through to someone and talk with staff, see if there's anything I missed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Michelle, back on Michael Hightower, back on Ms. Cobble's question, I guess in a very direct but yet respectfully simplistic way, had the City of Stonecrest Code required a SLUP, quite frankly, the situation that she referenced could not have existed unless it were for City Council. Is that correct with this new recommendation?
I'm not following.
Michelle?
I don't understand.
I'm saying the use, one of the more recent uses that situations that Ms. Carver referenced, type of use, what you're recommending, that type of use that the city has experienced for the past few months, there's been a huge discussion, would require a action by the City Council for approval. Is that correct or not? Not what we're proposing.
It's proposing a public process, yes, to go through the special land use permit process.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and now I would like to also add, when you talk about the comparison between DeKalb County and Stonecrest, that's kind of thing for the sake of council members. And I also talked with the group about was the encroachment issues within and around the industrial park, to certainly make certain that there are buffers around the industrial park so that communities, that the industrial park don't encroach upon communities, but vice versa also, that not just in but particularly in Stonecrest, that we do not allow for communities to be built in industrial parks as well. So, those kind of things would certainly prevent, any encroachment, where you're going to bring communities into the industrial park and bring industrial parks into communities. We got to respect both. And the same thing we talked about, I've talked to industrial members about, is how can we now, in particular, I'm not talking about, I'm specifically talking about Lithonia Industrial Park. Just to be clear, how can we allow for provide for the number of homes or citizens who are basically stuck in the industrial park now because they have homes there? How can we provide for those folks to move, to relocate, and so that we can certainly turn that industrial park into totally industrial park, so we can deal with some of the issues of encroachment?
Yes, and we talked about needing to maybe speak with economic development and others, since zoning can't really address that piece of it, but that's one of those parallel efforts, right? That zoning is the one side of it. What you're describing is this other side, some program to manage or address those situations.
And just to add to that, Councilman Clanton, when I had our meeting with Michelle, or I don't know, that was maybe the second or third one we had, but we also talked about to I guess mitigate some of the encroachment issue is looking at increasing the buffer distance. So in some areas it's 75, in some areas 100, 150, but truly, what's more reasonable for both sides, both residential and industrial, if we need to increase that buffer, I guess maybe in being parallel in programming and zoning until we get to a point where our economic development side can do something about programming. If we increase buffers where residential and industrial, residential and commercial meet, then we may be able to solve some of the existing issues by just increasing that buffer size. So something to consider. Not that I was, the expert on what is the appropriate buffer, but definitely is something that we looked into.
But the thing is, we have to zoom into the map and see where those increases are needed, as opposed to just offering a global increase in buffering. So I don't know how we would do that. Whether it would have to do with whether you zone M or M2. So M will require a certain amount of buffering, whereas M2 may be larger amounts, or whatever is the norm for that. So certainly we have to zoom into our maps and do what makes sense, particularly for our citizens who live near and now live in the industrial park for all practical purposes.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It doesn't need to be a cookie cutter. We definitely need to look and see what fits what for, which areas more conducive.
Council, I really don't want to, cut anyone short of questions that they might have. But what I see we need here is a workshop specifically on this subject, so we could go hours and hours and hours. And but to stretch this one out that long, I think it was just to be a presentation of information, and I don't want to cut anyone's questions short. So I'm kind of letting it flow. But at the same time, we want Michelle to get through this because we do have other agenda items. And we definitely need to schedule a workshop so we can go through the details of several of these items that you brought up.
Yes, thank you. And the interviews that we've been doing have helped a lot to get into the substance. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is actually talking about how do we expand the uses that we want to promote in the light industrial districts. Right now, it surprised me that we don't have business and technology parks as permitted uses in industrial. We don't have research laboratories permitted as by right in industrial. So we wanted to add to them to expand and make it as easy as possible for a whole range of additional businesses to move into the area. The next couple slides, I'm just going to hit some highlights because a big bulk of the work concerned what staff encounters on the day-to-day basis. Customers come to the desk, customers call up and say, can I do this? Can I do that? And staff and the customer need some clarification, and we want the code to be as clear as possible. I know you've looked at the bed and breakfast, so we have some recommendations just to at least establish considering owner occupied for Airbnbs. The fuel pumps or gas stations. So we heard that from the community members, we heard that from the Planning Commission, and I've heard that from several of the elected officials, from you all. A question about gas stations and fuel pumps. Yes, they in the right place and done well, they make sense. The point isn't to get rid of them or forbid them. At least that's what I heard from you all. But at the very least, we want to make sure it goes through a public process. Under DeKalb, there was the whole process of that SLUP 6, that time where there was a lot of negotiation about, hey, let's go ahead and allow gas stations by right, just allow them in the places that make sense off the highways, a couple of different location criteria. That made sense for DeKalb, it's a big county. For the city, there are fewer and fewer places, and from what we hear from your, the input we've gotten, folks would like this to have a public process, and that way you can get in a lot more of your design standards and your requirements, as long as you have criteria, have it go through that public process. I'm not going to go through each one of these that you see on the screen. These are just some of the uses that we are looking at, that staff has identified, and we've had here and there comments from other input. Some that are new uses that you may not even have requests for, but you want to figure out how to accommodate, like, for example, brewery and winery, that third item down. This might be a great way to go ahead and just let's define it, make it easy to happen, but also make sure it has the standards in place. Hookahs and cigar lounges, these are a trend all around the country, actually all around the county, as well as in the region. So we wanted to make sure we brought it up to you. If you do want them, how do you want to allow them, and what are the rules? So we'll bring to you some specifics. If you have, please let us know if this is something you just don't want to see in the city, or what are those circumstances? We're eager to hear and talk about that. We're putting in language or preparing language for you to consider so that solar energy and sustainable measures are allowed and regulated in your code as well. These topics, these are all in Article 5, your building form and site layout. It's some cleanup issues regarding porches and what can be encroaching into the yards. The last item on here, the setback averaging, I'm gonna kind of wrap up with this one. This serves double duty, this issue. This is both an example about, on the left-hand side, you see that long paragraph. This is about setback averaging. So that means it's really intended for infill. So say you have an aging neighborhood and, next thing you know, my neighbor has a tear down and they build back a house, and their setback, their yard is very different than the rest of the street. There's this section in the DeKalb County Code is really to make sure that some of these older subdivisions that have like really big setbacks, really big front yards that are bigger than what the zoning district requires, they're bigger. So when a new guy comes in, they want to make sure that they follow what's on the ground, the pattern on the street, on these older subdivisions. We looked at your plats and your housing and the building envelopes, and you really don't have that issue. Your subdivisions are newer, they meet the criteria of the zoning district. So there's two things. One, this is a lot of language. The code is filled with lots of sections that are very cumbersome to read, as you see on the left-hand side. And that's just one topic. But in this case, you know, and on the right-hand side, you could make it easier to read. So that's some of the tasks we're going through and cleaning up. And that's a big push, a big lift to clean up and make it easier to read. But we're actually recommending you actually remove this section because it doesn't appear that you need it. You already have your housing meets your districts, your zoning districts already dictate what the yards are, and that's the uniform street that you have. So it doesn't look like you actually even need this section. I just wanted to bring both sides of this issue to you. The cumbersome language of the code that doesn't have to be cumbersome, but then actually on this particular one, it doesn't look like setback averaging is something that the city needs, and it confuses a user because they don't know what's an applicant doesn't know what is my yard. Is it what the zoning district says, or is it this cumbersome way of measuring what everyone is next door to me? So those are the big ticket items as we've been going through. So we're going to continue to meet with stakeholders, continue our interviews with you. We're eager to get back on a work session, Councilman Turner, and follow up and get some of this detailed language and hear from you if there's any other direction you want to share with us from what we've met and discussed tonight. We're here to listen.
Understanding zoning is a very complicated process, and it takes a lot of time. And you have given us a lot to consume, particularly this evening in such a short period of time. However, the questions that have been asked, I personally believe there were some great questions, and I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into some of those concerns, and also to involve other stakeholders, including the regular constituents, as to what is going on, and to get them to really understand what we are embarking upon here. And with that, I'm going to see if you can't fit in a workshop so we can just talk zoning, because to squeeze it into this meeting or to a work session, I think is doing a disservice to this whole process. And this is not something that we can rush. We rushed with DeKalb County to adopt theirs when we first started the city, with the intent to take our time and come back and get it right when we have the chance to clean it up. So to rush through this now would be, like I said, we're doing us a disservice. So we want to take our time and make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve, and that we get some input from all of the stakeholders to the point that they have a pretty good understanding of how it works. I'm not sure we'll ever fully understand how it works, but get a much better understanding of how this process works. So I'm going to be asking for a workshop specifically on this, so we can talk about it for hours and hours if we need to, but this will be the only subject. So just my 2 cents. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments?
I just support you, Councilman Turner, in that request, and I think Michelle understands. We had a very interesting conversation, but I now know that this planning and zoning piece is the most important, my opinion. Let the record reflect my opinion. This planning and zoning piece is the most important piece in the city when you start to talk about the planning piece. So Michelle, I definitely would love to have the workshop take place. So check your calendar while we check ours, and we'll be in touch soon.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Then we take your presentation as information, and good information at that. And that being the case, we thank you, Mr. Hightower and Ms.
Thank you.
Alexander. Next is public comments. Madam City Clerk.
Okay, we just have one. Please read this at the City Council meeting. The past City Council meeting discussing the city budget is one way to measure the commitment council members have to the citizens of Stonecrest. Unfortunately, there was only one topic discussed: the money to be spent on assisting the council members themselves. There was no discussion of increasing road repairs, no discussion about making the new city hall an exciting place to show potential businesses and residents the quality of the city. No discussion around moving the police precinct to the mall. No discussion around improving our parks. The only discussion was around not acquiring Arabia Mountain, a suggestion made by the representative of District 5, where Arabia Mountain is located. So the money, $440,000, could be used to give each council person a dedicated assistant. Later, they changed the title to constituent contact. Wow, I thought my district council person was my constituent contact. They can justify paying each of their 5 assistants a full-time salary, but do not want to pay the mayor a full-time salary. They offer no job description for the new 5 employees. They offer no list of responsibilities for the new 5 employees. The job of city council is to introduce legislation, help make the city attractive to builders who want to increase our population, to attract businesses who will both employ and serve our city, to develop solutions to the needs of their districts through legislative action, to work together to improve the city, and to improve the city for its constituents. Somehow, our council people think their job is to criticize everything the city staff and mayor attempt to do. No critic has ever created or built anything. Critics only slow process. Please, please be a vote for yes to growth. Please, please be a vote for yes to the next step. Stop standing in the way and finding every small fault with new initiatives. Move the city ahead. Serve your constituents by improving what the city has to offer. City council members make a legislative motion. Do something other than stopping things. Please buy and improve the purchase of Arabia Mountain and stop waiting for DeKalb to do what it hasn't done for years. Regards, Susan Frick, District 5 resident. And that is the only comment.
And those comments will be made a part of the minutes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Council would like to ask you to reconsider an action we took earlier with the minutes. I don't believe we handled that correctly. So if you will, and Mr. Attorney, let me know if I'm doing this correctly by going back to this item on the agenda.
What's that, Mayor Pro Tem?
No, Mr. City Attorney.
Oh, I thought you said Turner.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mark, you on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't believe we handled things correctly with the approval of the minutes, and I would like to enter a motion to reconsider the action for that particular item. Am I in order?
Yes, sir. You can, that is a motion that's subject to reconsideration. Is that the same order of proceeding? Yes, sir. You are in order.
Thank you. Council, we did not approve the minutes, nor did we make any motion for action on the first 4. And on the 5th one, we basically said to disapprove it, but we didn't move to take any further action on it. So what I'm going to suggest is that someone enter a motion for reconsideration of action with the minutes, so we can go back and entertain that.
Can you repeat what you said that we did with the 5th one?
There was a motion to not approve it, and it was just left to be corrected later on. But when you just simply do not approve it, is that other action needed? Do we need to defer it so we can come back and fix it and bring it back to the council?
I thought your motion included that.
Okay, and then if that one's satisfied, the other 4, we basically just moved on from them.
Right. Yeah. Maybe Sonia can replay it, but I thought your motion included that we would not approve them and then we would go back and make some adjustments.
And bring it back to
something similar to that. Yeah.
Okay, then,
yeah.
Then E is, I guess, complete and acceptable. Then the first 4, there was no movement for any action to accept, to defer, to deny or anything. We just basically moved on. I will
Right.
entertain a motion for action on item A, B, C, and D, and you can make it a
Mr.
consensus.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes, sir.
I do recall the Ms. Isom adding that each of those was not ready and was to be moved until the next council meeting. But I don't know if we actually had that as a motion as we moved forward.
And that's what I'm saying. We need action from the council to either accept them, defer them, move them to the next council meeting, which is the same as the deferral, such that we have it on record that we took action one way or the other.
Well, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I make a motion that we defer A, B, C, D into the next council meeting.
We have a motion on the floor, waiting on a second.
Second.
Been properly moved in second that we defer items A, B, C, and D of the minutes to the next council meeting. Are you ready for the question?
Ready?
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor say aye, starting with District 1.
Aye.
District 2.
Aye.
District 3.
Aye.
District 4 is aye. District 5.
Aye.
Motion carries. The items A, B, C, and D are deferred to the next council meeting. Thank you very much. I believe that's cleaner than what we had. Next item on the agenda is no old business. We're moving to new business to set city council meeting and work session calendar for FY 2021. Madam Clerk, do you have that available for display?
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, we included that in the packet. And per our discussion from a few meetings back, the decision was made that the second Monday of the month would be the work session. And then the fourth Monday of the month would be the council meeting, with the option of having another work session on the third Monday of the month, but that would be optional and up to the discretion of the council to call those as necessary. And excuse me. So basically what was presented in your packet was beginning on Monday, January 11th, there would be a working session. And then on Monday, January 25th, that entire meeting would just be dedicated to having the council meeting. The only other thing that was added was that if the Monday fell on a holiday, then the meeting would be held that following day on that next business day, being that Tuesday.
Is it already built in?
Actually, none of the meetings fell on a holiday, so so it was not necessary to move anything as well.
I see all these Mondays.
Yeah, everything, all of the miraculously, not Memorial Day, 4th of July, or any of the other holidays fell on a holiday.
Even your budget public hearings fell on Mondays?
Yeah, I threw those in there to just to once again as for a discussion. So the plan was that beginning in October 11th, we'd have the public hearing. The following week would be the budget workshop, and then miraculously November 1st falls on a Monday next year, and so that we would just have the approval meeting on that Monday.
I don't think it was a miracle, but okay. Council, any questions?
I had a question. Well, two questions. Let me start with the first one. I wanted to suggest that the budget workshop come before the public hearing, so that when we have the public hearing and the public is making its recommendations or evaluating what we propose, that it's after the partnership that the council brings along with the mayor and city manager, so that we don't have a public hearing and then we amend the budget and you know, just so that when we have it, it's already what we've agreed to present to the public. So all of the amendments and the kind of discussion and all that happens before the public gets it. And I think that that will help us move through the budget approval, because we've already signed, we've I won't say signed, sealed, and delivered, but you know what I mean? We've already come to the meeting of the minds. And so now we're just getting the public input of everybody's suggestions versus putting that in the middle.
You have a calendar with you,
That makes a lot of sense.
the 2021 calendar.
Yeah, so it would just be just changing the words, not necessarily the dates, but just the meeting description. You would just flip flop.
So
No, I guess you would have to change the dates. Yeah.
So what the councilwoman is proposing is that doing the budget workshop, and maybe instead of having that working session, maybe that working session on October 11th would then be the budget workshop, and then the following week have the budget public hearing on the 18th.
Right, because we only have to have a minimum of a week in between, but we can have more.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Okay, state the correction, or the modification rather.
Okay, so the modification would be on Monday, October 11th would be the fiscal year 22 budget workshop. And then Monday, October 18th would be the fiscal year 2022 budget public hearing.
Okay, anyone else? Any comment?
One other thing that I put in there was that all the meetings would begin at 6 p.m. Once again, just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. And
oh, that was my second thing I wanted to add. I knew there were two things. Yeah. So let me just speak for me. That works as long as we're virtual. If I've got to come from downtown Atlanta back to Stonecrest, 6 o'clock is going to be difficult. 7 was much easier, gives me a little bit more time. And I say that for me, but I think for a lot of people, no matter where you're coming from, 6 o'clock may be a little bit more difficult than 7. So I don't know what I'm recommending, but I'm just saying that in the virtual world, that's fine. If we go back to in person, 6 will be difficult for me to make.
Then I say we can keep that in mind, and if we need to modify this schedule, what do we need, about a 30-day notice to modify it and publicize it?
I'm afraid
if we change our meeting schedule, we have to notify the public how many days in advance?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, when you guys approve this tonight, it's going to be written in stone.
We'll make it 7 then.
This is Stonecrest.
Well, could we not approve it as a virtual calendar that would, approve it with the meeting starting at 7, except for all virtual meeting will start at 6, something along that line. I mean, because it's still etched in stone. So by default, our meetings are at 7 unless they're virtual. And if they're virtual, they start at 6.
Yeah. Actually, Councilman, I was teasing about it being etched in stone.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think me and Councilwoman Cobble are the only ones that got the joke. So
you're right.
No more jokes. No more jokes out of me. I know that's.
Thank you. Okay, I hear two things. One is to just leave it at 6, and hopefully this pandemic will blow over in the next few months, but should it end before the fiscal year ends of 2021, God, I hope so, then our meeting schedule might be a challenge for some people to get to it by 6 p.m. in person. So we can move it to 7 by action from the council, or we could go ahead and set it at 7 with the understanding that that is for face-to-face meeting and 6 o'clock is for virtual. We'll have the 2 times, the what if.
I think it's cleaner to just keep it at 6, and then, if we need to change it to 7, then we'll just do it at that time. Because we'll have to make a decision to come back in City Hall anyway. So there'll be a lot more decisions to be made around that anyway.
Yeah, let's move on.
So I do have, I'm sorry, Councilman Turner, I'm sorry.
No, you're going, I'm finished.
I do have a question, Mr. Joyner. October 11th is Columbus Day. Do you all not get that day? It's a federal holiday. Well, it's labeled Columbus Day, but do you all get that day? Because if so, we need to change that October 11th meeting date to October the 12th.
So City Hall does not recognize that particular holiday. That's one we do not recognize. We will be closed this coming Wednesday on Veterans Day, though.
Okay, so
Pliz, is that a City Hall thing or a Jacobs thing?
Actually, it's a City Hall thing.
So we can change that.
For concerning.
We could amend the holidays, I guess, for the city, because you're saying that is not something that Jacobs has placed on us. That is something that we have placed on ourselves. So we can amend the holidays.
That's on our holiday calendar. More than likely, we'll be bringing that at the next meeting, the holiday schedule for next year.
Okay, all right.
Well, it's a holiday. It's a holiday, and I just want to be on record stating that my request is to have the October 11th meeting on October the 12th. Whether we do anything or not, it's there for consideration. Okay. Thank you.
Well, if it's not a recognized holiday from the city, I don't think the school system recognizes it, do they?
It's a federal holiday.
Yeah,
the school system does, and the state does.
The schools may be.
Yeah. So.
All right. Okay. Well, what's your pleasure? How many changes?
I'm hearing a request to move the October 11th to October 12th.
That's the request.
October 12th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's one change, and the other change was
to keep the virtual meetings at 6 o'clock, and if we move back to City Hall at 7. Is that correct?
Yep.
Say that?
Yeah, and the other change was to change the budget workshop.
Right.
And that'll now be on
the 12th.
On the 12th.
Okay. You want to wait until next meeting to approve this, or you want to go ahead and approve it now with the changes?
I'm up for doing it now.
Yeah, let's do it now.
Someone state the motion.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I move that we adopt the 2021 City Council meeting dates with the 3 changes proposed. We're going to change Monday, October 11th to Tuesday, October 12th. The label or description for that meeting will be the FY 2022 budget workshop. The change to Monday, October 18th, we're changing the description to FY 2022 budget public hearing.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been properly moved and seconded. Are you ready for the question?
Did we say anything about the time?
We left the time at 6.
Okay.
Ready for the question? All in favor, say aye. Starting with District 1.
Aye.
District 2.
Aye.
District 3.
Aye.
District 4 is aye. District 5.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
All righty. I'll send the mayor and council an updated version of the meeting schedule, and then we'll also have that posted to the website.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is setting the Planning Commission calendar for FY 2021. Mr. Joyner, you have that one as well?
Mr. Chris Wheeler will handle that one.
All right.
Yeah. So the approved schedule that the Planning Commission approved last month is submitted to you in your packet. All those dates were agreed upon by the Planning Commissioners. Only thing that we need is final approval from City Council.
Did they bump ahead with any holidays? 1-5.
No, and those have not been on our meeting is always the first Tuesday of every month, and we didn't any of ours fall on the holiday. And if it did, we already made the adjustments to still be in line. That any application that comes before the Planning Commission can still be heard by council at the end of the month.
And you said the Planning Commission has already adopted this calendar?
Yes, sir.
All right, then to make it official, we have to adopt it as well. Council, any questions? Hearing no questions, are you prepared to move with the motion, the action?
Sure, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I move that we adopt the 2021 Planning Commission calendar as presented.
I get a second.
Second.
Been probably moved and second that we adopt the 2021 Planning Commission calendar as stated. You ready for the question?
Ready.
All in favor say aye. Beginning with District 1.
Aye.
District 2.
Aye.
District 3.
Aye.
District 4 is aye. District 5.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. That ends new business. We are at executive session. Is there any need for executive session? Hearing none, we are on to comments from Deputy City Manager.
Good evening, folks. Just real quick, hopefully everybody had a great weekend. Just wanted to announce our Stonecrest Cares initiative is hosting the very first of 4 feeding weekends. And so this coming Saturday, beginning at 10 o'clock, the Stonecrest Cares program in association with the King's Table at New Birth Church will be handing out 1,000 food boxes to families here in the Stonecrest and Southeast DeKalb County. So please come on out and support the initiative. And as I stated, we'll also be doing that the first 3 weekends, first 3 Saturdays in the month of December as well. So we'll be giving out a total of 4,000 meal boxes starting this coming Saturday.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney.
No update this evening, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much. District 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Only want to say that I'm proud of the voting efforts here in the city of Stonecrest. And I would have to say they will probably contributed to the voting outcomes in the state of Georgia, as well as potentially the nation. So, I think that we should still commend our people for coming out to vote, but also to admonish them and to encourage them to turn out again for the upcoming special elections. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. District 2.
Well, Councilman Clanton's point, I also like to thank everybody for coming out and exercising their right to vote and to turn Georgia a different color, which is a wonderful sight to see. But also like to congratulate our new President-elect, Joe Biden, and our new Vice President-elect, Senator Kamala Harris. And so is Kamala, what'd I say? Kamala. I'm not gonna try to be like Purdue, I promise you I won't butcher her name.
You got maybe 8 years to get it right.
Here you go. So, but really, thank you for coming out and voting. And again, don't forget, we still only halfway there. We still have to get 2 senators in too. So come on back out. It's important to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. District 3.
Councilman Rob Turner, that was me ski-weeing in the background as you were saying.
That's why I didn't recognize that. I only hear Delta stuff. I'm sorry.
Well, don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to hear 8 more years of
oh Lord, I know.
So of course I echo the same sentiments. We definitely need to come back out in January and solidify these 2 Senate seats. But I wanted to also let our constituents know to join us on November 21st between 10 and 12. Join myself, the wonderful group and the members over at Owsley United Methodist Church, as well as our most famous soccer club that plays at Farrington Park for a collaborative turkey giveaway. We're doing that November 21st from 10 to 12 o'clock. So it's going to be right here in the heart of District 3 over at Owsley United Methodist. So please come out. You'll see it on my social media. There'll be an email going out as well. And then it's also posted on the City of Stonecrest social media. So please come on out, grab a free turkey from us. Just doing what we can to support the community. The soccer club that plays at Farrington Park has always been very gracious to the city. And even when we started, taking over the parks and changing some programming, they just continue to express their desire to partner with our city and help the community that they come and play in the park for. So I was just super excited to join in that effort. So again, November 21st between 10 and 12, come on over to Owsley United Methodist. That's right here on Panola Road in the heart of District 3, and come get a free turkey from us. Looking forward to seeing you, and just look out for some more advertisement as we get closer to that date. That's it for me.
Thank you for the turkey.
You're welcome.
District 5.
Ooh,
There you go.
just can't be great.
The AKA
Okay.
was going to help you turn it on, but it looks like
Oh, need no help from the pink and green. All right, so I'd like to just say thank you to each and every individual who actually not only registered, but cast their ballots at the box. We need to be registered and ready for January the 5th. I am imploring anybody, especially those who are 17, turning 18 by December the 7th, to please, by January 5th, to please register to vote by December the 7th. And I'm really gonna get personal. All of those who came through a classroom where I taught, I am imploring you. I want Ms. Grimes's folks to turn out the vote, because I know I've touched the lives of many, and that would definitely help get those 2 Senate seats. I'd like to thank Ms. Porter with Parks and Rec and Mr. Riley for the things that they're doing on behalf of educators and schools in our city. I'll see you in the morning, Ms. Tamika, if I don't oversleep, as we bless and thank the schools that are in our city with a basket of love. And also, I'd like to say to Ms. Settles, thanks for pushing your efforts to have the names of those whom we can bless this Thanksgiving. It's greatly appreciated and it's needed. And so partnering with Parks and Rec and our COVID cares and all the other good things that we have in the city, thank you for that. And you'll have a list real soon. So that's it for District 5.
Thank you very much. Let me just close by saying that the census ended on the 15th of October in terms of collecting the data, but the census doesn't really end. And someone had asked me, how do we get people more involved? And I said, well, you need to start on the 2030 census now. And by that, I mean, we need a culture change in our community, not just for voting. It needs to be automatic. It needs to be part of our culture. The same thing with participating in the census. It needs to be a part of our culture. And we need to start working on that now to get these 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds who will be 18 and 30 years old 10 years from now, get them involved in the process such that it becomes a part of their culture and an automatic activity on their behalf. And in that light, a lot of people helped us to try to reach those hard to count people during the census. And I think I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. Some subdivision had a competition to see who could sign up the most folks to participate in the census. And we haven't determined a winner yet, but we are working on those numbers now, and we will announce a winner, and we'll have a celebration, probably a food truck at City Hall, within the next few weeks. We're working on that plan right now, so prepare to see something in the media real soon about thanking those who not only got people out to vote, but who got people to participate in the census, and people who are just involved in the civic process, and let them know that they are appreciated, but there is no end to it. You've got to keep it moving, and we've got to get involved even more. So with that, I say thank you, and we'll get those census numbers to you real soon. And again, the special zoning meeting, we need this. I'm going to work with Collaborative to see if we can't make that happen real soon. And I want to close by saying, folks, pray for our mayor that he does a speedy recovery. And I thank y'all so much for your time and attention. With that, did I miss anything? I think it's best we entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to
Mayor
adjourn.
Pro Tem, I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Got a couple of motions, so I'll take that as a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye. Starting with District 1.
Aye.
2,
Aye.
3,
Aye.
4 is aye. 5.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
y'all.
night, everybody.
Good night.